On today's podcast, I'm joined by Frank McKenna. Frank's founder and CEO of Downtown in Business. Downtown in Business is one of the most respected and fastest growing business network and community organisations across the north, growing from Liverpool to Lancashire, Manchester, Leeds, Birmingham. Frank's a regular commentator on business and political issues and host of his own podcast, which is absolutely brilliant, The Downtown Den, and gives the rest his politics a run for its money. Our conversation today with Frank's going to focus on leadership in business and politics. Frank, welcome to the table.
Cheers, Andrew.
Everyone knows you as Frank McKenna, businessman, entrepreneur. Where did it all start?
Probably go back to the 80s. So I was brought up in Skem, and basically back then you'll recall that we had a major problem in the UK with unemployment. So I've been to college, a good Catholic lad growing up in Skem where there was not much else to do, ended up getting married at 18, and therefore the opportunity of going on to university wasn't really an option for me. So I spent about 6 months on the dole, signing on, and during that period I went to work at the unemployed centre in the town as a volunteer advisor. So I started to learn about welfare benefits, supplementary benefit system as it was then. So fast forward about 6 months or so, I was applying for all sorts of jobs right across the country. The government's policy back then in terms of encouraging people to get into work was get on your bike, if you remember.
Yeah.
So
Can't remember the Tory politician whose speech it was, but yeah.
Mr. Tebbit.
There you go.
So I was applying for jobs all over the country. Eventually got myself an interview for Leicester City Council as for the position of a senior welfare rights advisor, which is a very innovative move from Leicester at the time. There weren't many of those sort of posts about, and to my surprise, I got the job. So it's about 20, I think I was. Moved up to Leicester or down to Leicester. Started doing that job as a welfare rights advisor. And basically what happened was we used to take a benefits bus out to an estate in Leicester. And honestly, Andrew, from about 8 o'clock in the morning to 6 o'clock at night, we'd have queues of people waiting for advice in terms of how they could claim additional benefits. And this benefits bus, which was a double-decker old style bus, had been converted into 3 offices. So there were 3 of us working, as I say, 8 o'clock in the morning till about 6 o'clock at night, just going through benefit checks for people. And at one level that was very satisfying because you were seeing people who were in genuine poverty, who didn't really have options and opportunities for work because, as I say, we had officially 3 million people unemployed at that time. I think the figure actually was probably much higher than that. And as I say, it gave you a deal of satisfaction. But then after about 9 months, first of all, it's not the greatest for your mental well-being, dealing with individuals who are in that sort of poverty,
part civil servant,
difficulty, challenges that you're seeing every day. And even though you're able to go home at night, and I was in a very well-paid job by this point, it was still quite tough. But the other thing that struck me was that when you give somebody an additional uplift to their income level, whether it be somebody who's on 30 grand a year and you give them 35 grand, somebody who's on 100, 200 pound a week, you give them 210, they soon start to live to that level. Yeah. So that initial boost in income might have been great for those people for 2-3 months, but after that, they're back into the life of basically struggling along, facing all those challenges I was talking about. So I thought, this isn't really making the difference that I want to be making to people's lives. So something had started to emerge from America at the time called community development, community work. So I started to look at opportunities around the world of community development. And there was a job for Clwyd County Council in Deeside that was advertised in the Wednesday Guardian. Used to be sort of my go-to place for jobs in those days. And again, applied for that job, was lucky enough to get it and started to do community development work. Worked in North Wales for about a year or so, but was living in Skelmersdale, back in Skelmersdale, to be close to the family. By this time, I had a couple of kids, so it was important we had family who could help us with the children, and was travelling from Skem to North Wales every day, so that wasn't ideal.
Yeah.
I've got my dream job, really, in a sense, came about 18 months after that, and I was made the community development officer for Skelmersdale. So that was, as I say, fantastic for me, because I'm back in the town that I've got an emotional attachment to. I'm living in the place. I knew an awful lot of people, obviously, because I'd grown up there, knew some of the politicians, knew the issues that needed to be addressed around some of the estates, council estates of Skelmersdale. And so I was delighted to get that particular position and started cracking on and working with tenants associations, working with citizens advice bureaus, the unemployed centre where I volunteered a number of years earlier, and started to build a bit of a reputation for myself, really, as somebody who would be disruptive, shake things up, get things done. And that was great, as I say, did that for a couple of years, was offered a more senior role doing a similar job in St Helens, so did that for a time for the local authority there, and then realised that whenever you wanted to do something that was significant, you had to go and ask the permission of a politician.
Right.
So I thought, well, if you really want to make a difference, what you need to do is become a politician. And I've been in the Labour Party since I was 17, 18 years of age. I've done an awful lot of work in terms of, knocking on doors, being chairman of the local branch, secretary of the constituency Labour Party. So at the age of, I think it was about 24, 25, I decided I was going to go for it. And again, quite fortuitously, a seat came up in Skelmersdale East, which was an interesting constituency because it included a place called Up Holland, which is like the posh part of Skelmersdale. In fact, if you're from Up Holland, you don't say you're from Skelmersdale. And then Parbold, Wrightington, Apley Bridge, but then a chunk of the new town as well.
This is rural West Lancashire.
Yeah, rural West Lancashire.
Never thought that was fell into Skem's kind of patch.
And some of the urban part as well. So it was considered at the time a marginal seat, but in a good year, Labour was always going to win it. Anyway, again, rather surprisingly, at the age of 26, I was selected and then subsequently elected to Lancashire County Council. So I think when I first went in, a few people thought I was there on day release, as a work experience kid, because most of the councillors, especially at county level, because quite a traditional, old-fashioned local authority, really, were, I'll be kind and say mid-50s, but I bet you the average age was a bit higher than that. But I was very fortunate in that the leader was a woman called Louise Elman, and Louise Elman was a Skelmersdale councillor who knew me really well. And so they had, by this time, established within the county of Lancashire a welfare rights service themselves. And she knew my background, knew I'd done some work in that area, and they had a welfare rights subcommittee. And she said, you can chair that.
So at 26, you're chairing a...
it was just a dream.
Okay.
I mean, it was just... And very lucky. When people say, what's the main attribute to success in life? Luck has to be within the top three of those things.
You make your own luck. Though.
Well, sometimes. But, Louise, had I been somebody from Blackpool, wouldn't have known who I was, wouldn't have trusted me with that role. And therefore you wouldn't have been given that responsibility at such an early stage of your political career. And welfare rights at that time covered, benefits, yes, but also we were looking at the impact of high levels of unemployment, of sickness, of disability, of the changes that the government at the time were introducing to all those areas of society. And so in terms of media coverage, I was never out of the papers because we were almost doing a regular commentary on why we thought how the government were performing was as to the detriment of an awful lot of people who were socially excluded in the county of Lancashire. And of course, the other great thing was we were able to say that every year We were investing probably around £300,000 in a welfare rights advice service, and that was bringing back into the pockets of the people we were advising about £3 million, which was then circulating back into the Lancashire economy. So there was an economic argument for that service. So it was a great role to have for that, as I say, initial job. And yeah, for next 4 years, I sort of made that area of expertise my own and started to create and build a reputation of being a bit of a champion for people who were facing really hard challenges in life.
It's an interesting insight, that, because you're kind of describing, you're seeing the symptoms of the disease of economic stagnation, of decline. You're seeing the symptoms in the community, and then you're able to go back and say, okay, these are the treatments you're implementing, these are the effects they're having on the ground. We don't seem to have that in the modern debate. Nobody's kind of mature enough to say, look, this is the problem we're trying to solve as far as inequality goes. These are the interventions governments have staged. Is that something you think has changed? Have we lost that narrative since the 80s, or was it equally difficult back then to be able to say, grasp on the ground issues, these are the government policies, this is the effect, positive or negative, you're having?
I think it was as difficult then. I think what was probably a little clearer was the political differential between the government and the Labour Party at the time. So the government, I think, Thatcher's government would be seen as being a transformational administration, and the legacy of that, you would say, was relatively positive. But my criticism of Thatcher's government back then, and still is today, was not necessarily some of the things she tried to do or wants to do, but it was the way she did it. And I think it was a cruel government. I think people were written off. She famously said there is no such thing as society.
Yeah.
And I think she actually believed that. And so at that point, it was probably, as I say, a bigger differential between the Labour Party and the Conservative Party. And it was a two-party state. So you didn't really have those fringe elements like the Greens, like Reform,
SDP
that we
came
have
along
now.
when
They'd been and gone.
Right,
I mean,
okay.
by that time, they sort of they fizzled out by then. So yeah, I think, was it easier? No, but was it? I think, could you have an argument that was a bit more nuanced? Absolutely. Everything wasn't seen in terms of black and white. You weren't having to take to Twitter to make your case in 140 characters or whatever it is. So in that regard, it was probably easier. But I still think those big differences and those arguments about what is fair and how you deliver a fair society were still going on then as they are now.
So you've come into this, you're in your 20s, you're clearly entrepreneurial and driven, and you've always struck me as the sort of fellow who doesn't, you don't take no as the first answer. It's we'll work the problem. What were the limitations in politics? So you've made this transition from civil servant. You're very, in today's language, mission orientated. You're driven by that cause, and you're an ambassador, and you're a servant for the people and working it. Once you're in politics, what's the next thing? Where what are the limitations of the local politics?
I think several. I mean, firstly, obviously, as a local politician, you've not got all the levers available to you to pull in terms of being able to tackle some of those big difficulties that you face. And in places like Skelmersdale, we still had a much higher rate of unemployment than in the rest of the country. A lot of youth unemployment, which was a particular challenge. And so education was something that I was really interested in trying to frame differently, and we're still having the same discussions and arguments about education as I was having back then, sadly. But I think that for me, at that sort of young age, and possibly naively, I did feel as though we were able to make quite a significant difference to people's lives, whether that be through that welfare rights service, whether that be taking the sharp edges of changes to social care and social services away because we'd intervene, and we did have a much bigger resource in local government back then than local councils have now. So we were able to, as I say, intervene, I think, far more effectively. And I think the other thing that happened, and this was in 1992, was that I was able to lead the campaign for the general election in West Lancashire, and we, again, surprisingly, we won the seat. So it was a Conservative seat, and we gained it. It was a Labour gain. And I think most people at that point thought that Neil Kinnock was going to become Prime Minister. Of course, he fell a little short, but the consolation prize for us was that we had a Labour MP in West Lancashire, and he made me his political advisor. So I was at County Hall learning the ropes in terms of how local government worked, and obviously working very closely with the leadership, particularly Louise. And I was in Parliament seeing how things operated in Westminster, which was fascinating.
That must be a big shock because you're in your late 20s at this point.
I was, what was I by? Yeah, just late 20s. And
gone from Skem to the Palace of Westminster.
Skem to Westminster.
Yeah.
And it's funny because people say to me, God, that must have been quite awe-inspiring. And it was inspiring, but it wasn't in any way, shape or form daunting to me. I never felt as though I had imposter syndrome. I always felt comfortable in those surroundings. In fact, I remember walking into County Hall, and there's a big chamber there. It's similar to Parliament in a sense, slightly different in its layout, but it's a big old chamber. I remember the first time I walked in thinking, I can't wait to make a speech here. And some of my colleagues were there for 4 or 5 years, never made a speech. I was like, first time I was in full council, made a speech. I couldn't wait. And Westminster was the same. I walked in, I thought, I can't wait to get stuck into this place. It was brilliant.
This interest in politics, this drive, has it come from your parents? What was were you the kid that always wanted to kind of get the attention and stand up?
No, not particularly. I think you'd be a strange kid if you were dead interested in politics. And maybe those kids do exist and end up in Parliament, and that's why we've got a lot of strange MPs. I was into football and Everton. That was my priority when I was growing up as a kid, and then girls. And then politics came along afterwards, really, college, I suppose. But my dad was a big trade unionist.
Okay.
So I was always had half an eye on politics. I was always having conversations at home with my mum and dad about the political situation. And he was left. He was more left than I am, my dad. So, there was an interest garnered in a sense from, my background and home life. But it was largely something that evolved through college and my own interest.
That must have made him very proud to see you go into that line.
Well, I'm sure it did, but he never told me, because that's what old-fashioned working class dads were like. My mum told me every day, how fantastic I was. But that was like long before. That was when I was on the dole, never mind when I was in politics. But no, I think he was. And again, from a personal perspective, that's great, isn't it? That you can give something back to your parents. And although my dad was a bus driver, and my mum was what was known back then traditionally as a housewife, occasionally did part-time work and so on, but largely stay-at-home mum, the most important job on the planet in many respects. So we never had loads of cash. But I'll tell you what, I wouldn't swap that upbringing for anybody else's. It was great.
So, you mentioned Louise Ellman. You go down as a parliamentary assistant. You've had some good role models. You had some good mentors in politics then.
Louise, definitely. I think the guy I worked for in Parliament used to frustrate me. A fellow called Colin Pickthall. He was a good constituency MP, but didn't really have any aspiration or ambition to get into cabinet or become a junior minister. And that's, again, you're somebody who wants to make a difference, as I did. You want to be working for somebody who's at that higher level of government. So that was a bit frustrating. But of course, when you're in and around Westminster, you start to meet the shadow cabinet ministers, as it was then, started to talk to some Conservative counterparts as well. So you start to learn how you can tweak legislation, even from the opposition benches. And you begin to understand and appreciate that actually people aren't just trying to kick lumps out of each other from different political sides. There's an awful lot of coming together at times, and an awful lot of the things that were done even during that period, 92 to 97, Child Support Agency Act, for example, which we were able to influence and tweak a little. Some of the benefit changes that were being introduced simply because that was my area of expertise. I had a lot of Conservatives coming to me saying, what do you think about this? So that was useful. But in terms of that political influence, it came from people like Louise in that leadership role. There was a woman called Joan Humble, who was chair of Social Services Committee at Lancashire County Council, went on to become MP for Blackpool. So again, because of welfare rights, social services, I ended up doing a lot of work alongside her as well. Chair of Education at Lancashire was a woman called Josie Farrington, who went into the Lords eventually. She was fantastic. And again, I was able to go and speak to Josie and talk to her about some of the changes that I'd like to have seen in education. We did sort of start to promote Skem College more effectively, for example, in the town, those sort of things. And then Ruth Hennig, she was chair of the police committee, and I had a big interest in home affairs, so was able to work alongside Ruth in terms of policing in Lancashire. We appointed the first female chief constable in the country, so very proud of that, being involved in that process. And, you know, all of those, and this is just a coincidence, but formidable female political leaders had a much bigger influence on me than any of the parliamentarians that I came up against or worked alongside, I should say. Simply because you're working with them on a daily basis and you're working with them on issues that you can potentially do something about.
Fantastic. So that role of a parliamentary assistant, you're lobbying, you're helping draft legislation. What's the day-to-day for somebody?
It's quite broad, and it depends who you're working for. So as I say, Colin, you know, at one level frustrated me because he didn't have that much ambition in terms of going up the parliamentary ladder. However, what that enabled me to do was focus on policy, on strategy, on campaigns, on working with the National Party and the Regional Party on things that were going to win us the 1997 election. And Colin was quite comfortable to go and do advice surgeries and answer complaints from people who were complaining about the bins and all that sort of thing. And a lot of parliamentary assistants are doing that. So I was lucky in that regard. Again, come back to that word, luck. And so I was able to get stuck into, as I say, strategy, policy. I was seen as a bit of a rising star in the Labour Party, so they were giving me platforms to go and speak at different events, whether that be to groups of community leaders or stakeholders or even businesses from time to time. And so, you know, I just had, with that dual role of county councillor and parliamentary assistant, an awful lot of opportunity to go and speak to various audiences, and I think more importantly to listen to what they were saying. So by the time we got to 1995, and sadly John Smith passed away, of course, Tony Blair emerged as the favourite to become leader of the Labour Party, and I was approached to be his campaign coordinator in Lancashire. Okay. So again, all of a sudden, you know, you've got access to people that you've not worked with before. So that, again, really good opportunity for me.
There must have been lots, or were there many people like you at the time with energy in that new Labour movement? It was a time of change. It was a time of ambition. You know, were you rare, or there a gang of kind of young guns coming up that had kind of a new energy?
I'm not sure whether it was rare. I'm sure there were plenty of people about, but it's quite I mean, in West Lancashire, what I'd set about doing as the guy who was running the parliamentary office was trying basically to turn the West Lancashire Labour Party into a new Labour Party, because it was quite traditional, quite old-fashioned. An awful lot of people on the council who wanted to get carried out in a box but didn't really want to do anything. Yeah. So I was shaking up things within the constituency. Didn't make me the most popular person with some people, but what you did see during that period of time, far more so than now, I think, was an enthusiasm around that Labour brand and a lot of younger people coming through. So we were able to freshen the Labour Party up in the local constituency, and I did lead that. Were there an army of people who were like me and fully bought into New Labour and Tony Blair and his vision for the country? I'm not sure there was, but I think what you did have was an army of people who were fed up being in opposition, in the Labour Party and realised that Tony Blair was the best person and our best chance of ending that.
Is it true of FT journalists coined you New Labour's man in the north?
Yeah. So that came about because, and this is when we were in government by this time, it's 97. So I'd become deputy leader of the Labour group at County Hall, deputy leader of the council, and leader of the North West Regional Assembly, which was seen as the forerunner at the time as a regional parliament for the North West, similar to what they've got in Scotland and Wales. So very high-profile politician by this point, and went to speak to a group of business leaders in Wigan, of all places, in the investment centre there. And there was an FT journalist sat in the audience, and she said to me afterwards, that's just like the new Labour script. Nobody had given me a script. I was just talking as how I felt. Relationships and partnerships should be between the public and private sector. And she coined that phrase.
Fantastic. I mean, that's kind of one of your real talents is you're a brilliant communicator, and you're great at contextualizing. When I speak to you, you get things straight away, and then you'll recite it back to me with a much clearer narrative than's been given to you. So this new Labour kind of period has come into office. That's when you sort of transition from that welfare advocate and champion into business. You focus very much more on business. Was that a deliberate thing, or was that just
no? It's part of the process in a sense. It's almost accidental. So what had happened was, in 90, let me get this right in terms of the time scale. So 97, as I say, we're leading up to that general election. Tony's leader. I think it would have taken a catastrophic meltdown of the Labour Party for us not to win that election in 97. I don't think we expected the landslide, but we expected to win. And so Louise, by this point, had decided to go off to Liverpool Riverside and be a Member of Parliament herself. And obviously, since 89, she'd been grooming me to an extent. Now, I never felt as though I was being lined up for the leadership of Lancashire County Council, but as soon as she stood down, she got me into her office and said, right, you're going to take my role. And that was quite even then, I was pleased to be having that offer made, but it was still a little bit, am I quite ready for this? Been on the county, 8 years by that point. And she said, you're not going to be leader, because that job was going to her deputy, John West, who was a great guy, but was very sort of technocratic. So, by his own admission, not the most charismatic of figures, not the best orator, but a great party manager, great at finance, looked after the detail of what the county council, what the local authority was up to. None of those are my strengths. I don't really do detail. I do strategy. I can take a brief. I can find out exactly what message we're trying to get across with a particular policy initiative. But, don't get me on and say, how much is this going to cost and what's the ins and outs, and dot the I's and cross the T's. That's not my role. So she said, you'll be deputy leader, but you're going to take over all the things that I do.
Okay.
So she was Lancashire's lead on the regional assembly. She was Lancashire's, she was chairman of Lancashire Enterprises Limited, which was the public-private sector partnership that was the economic development arm of the county council.
This is pre-NWDA kind of days,
yeah. And then all the policy stuff, all the press stuff, the media stuff, that was coming to me. So she was the high-profile politician, and that role was basically being transferred to me, albeit our deputy leader, and John was going to be leader, but do those more mundane things, if I can put it that way.
How does that transition feel then? So you're stepping up, you've had that vote of confidence, but also you're losing your mentor at the same time. Was that sort of doubly daunting, or you kind of went home and got over it and just got into the job?
Yeah, I think you're so busy, because obviously I was still working as a parliamentary advisor as well. And then you're just thrown into these roles. There's no training that you go on. There's no, for 6 weeks you can go over there and learn how to do this job. You've just got to go in, roll your sleeves up and teach yourself how to do it as best you can, I suppose. But I think that, you know, basically what she'd identified, and John, to be fair to him, because there's not many politicians who are prepared to take the back seat in the way that John was as far as that was concerned, was that they recognised my strengths. And, you know, my strengths basically going out there, as I say, telling a story, creating a narrative and delivering policy, making people understand where you wanted to go, where that journey's end was. And, you know, officers, officials, civil servants, they appreciate that sort of straight talking, that narrative, as do the electorate. And if you're able to tell that story and you've got that clear plan, but importantly, being able to articulate it, as I say, I think John and Louise seen in me the vehicle with which that could be done best.
So it's about this time, Lancashire Enterprise, then on to kind of Merseyside Entrepreneurship Commission. I think you've been an NED on NHS Trust.
That came a bit later, the Entrepreneurship Commission. So I think this is an important part of my journey, really. So up until 97, as I say, my focus had been welfare rights, social services, very much what you call the softer side of politics, the Labour side of politics, things you'd associate Labour with. So, you know, welfare rights, as I say, social care, education up to a point. But all those things that, as I say, you would naturally think, well, that's where a Labour politician's interests are going to be.
It's not where you'd envisage a business advocate and an entrepreneur being. It's an interesting
and absolutely, and I wasn't. You know, I sort of realised that it was important for us to be seen as business friendly. But if I'm honest, I was probably thinking, well, that shows we don't get stick in the Daily Mail and the Daily Telegraph, rather than it being a genuine sentiment. Because I think when you come from my background, say, you know, unemployed in Skem for a time, a lot of my mates on the dole, 3 million people thrown on the scrap heap from what I could see, and then a Conservative Party that is obviously seen as the natural party of business. There's a scepticism about the private sector, and you do think that everybody who's a boss or an entrepreneur basically trying to rip the country off. So I don't think my attitude was massively different when we got to that election win of 97. I was made chairman of Lancashire Enterprises. And Lancashire Enterprises, just to explain what that was, as I say, it was an arm's-length economic development company that Louise Ellman had set up in the 80s, much to the disdain of the Tory government at the time. And they took the council to court to try and stop that initiative from happening.
But that's entrepreneurial, it's regional,
But it was
small
Labour doing it.
Right, okay.
so we... And it was interventionist. So famously... they saved Leyland Trucks. Lancashire Enterprises saved Leyland Trucks from going bust. That was about 92. So anyway, I goes onto this board as chair, and all of a sudden you are dealing with, on a weekly basis, business leader. And you're talking to these guys, and these guys are saying to you, well, we want to invest this, and we want to employ this many people, and we'd quite like to do this for the community. And we've got this charity ball next week. Would you mind coming along to that? And you recognise the fact that 90% of people in business are actually good guys, good girls. They want to put back as well. It's just they've gone down a different route of wanting to do it. So, yeah, of course they want to make money. They want to make a profit. But, you know, what I'd already understood way before 97 was if you wanted to redistribute wealth, someone had to create it. And that's not government's role. That's not local government's role. That's the role of entrepreneurs and business people. So all of a sudden, speaking to these business leaders, I'm thinking, actually, the sensible way forward to drive our economy in Lancashire isn't to try and fight against these people or take against them or to talk them down. It's to work with them. And so we all of a sudden start to create very strong public-private partnerships right across the county, including in Skelmersdale, that were, I think, you know, making some difference to our thinking around skills, education and training, making a difference to their thinking around, should we be employing more local people? How can we support FE? What can we do around the apprenticeship agenda? So all of a sudden you've got that public-private sector cooperation and collaboration that before 97 I probably didn't quite get. Louise Ellman got it, which is why she set Lancashire Enterprise up in the first place. But until you come face to face with that and you're dealing with that on a practical basis every day, I'm not quite sure that you are genuine in terms of saying, oh, of course, we're a business-friendly party now, you know.
How did they take to you? So, as you know, if you're a MD and you told this guy who's a welfare background's coming in to chair the committee, that must have been a rough couple of first meetings before they got to know you.
It wasn't really. I mean, I think there was a longer transition than that. I think I'd been put on the board for a year so they sort of knew, you know, there's not some sort of left-wing firebrand coming in to rip the place up and start again, so to speak. It was very much a continuity of what Louise and others had done prior to me taking that chair's role. I think the Scouse accent was probably more of a challenge than anything else, to be honest.
In Lancashire?
Yeah, but they probably did think, didn't they? Bloody hell, these Scouts are coming in. This is going to be interesting. But no, it was fine. And as I say, I quickly understood and appreciated that business was an important part of what we were trying to do to grow the economy of Lancashire.
So you've gone from this kind of personal service, welfare, serving the community that way, to the powers of the politicians, and this realisation that actually the wealth comes from business, and you've kind of gone through that journey so far. And then you're focusing on business for the next few years, and then you start downtown.
Well, basically what happened was we went through that 4-year period. Regional Assembly obviously was a fantastic role as well. So when I became leader of the Regional Assembly, which was a new role that was being created, as I say, that was seen as the forerunner to a regional parliament. And that was where I thought my future lay. You know, talking earlier about my ideal job, Community Development Officer for Skelmersdale, and that was a fantastic role. Prime Minister for the North West has a nice ring to it, yeah?
Yeah, okay.
So I thought that is where I'm destined to go. But as many politicians have found, not everything goes in a straight line and not everything goes to plan. So I just try and keep this story as brief as I can, but I mentioned that I'd been quite disruptive in terms of the West Lancashire Labour Party. So we, for want of a better phrase, done a lot of people who I felt had sort of passed the sell-by date, if they'd ever had a sell-by date, to be honest, some of them. We transformed the party to an extent, but of course, you make enemies along the way. So by 99, 2000, yeah, about 2000, my name started appearing in Private Eye on a fairly regular basis. In fact, every issue for about 52 consecutive issues, which I think is a record. So thanks to Ian Hislop and his colleagues. And it was all to do with the election campaign of 1997. Now, by this point, a couple of things had happened. I'd managed to persuade the Boundary Commission to lop off part of what was originally the West Lancashire constituency, which made it a marginal seat, and transfer about 8,000 Tory voters to South Ribble constituency. Right. So there were boundary changes, and we've managed to make West Lancashire...
Is that local boundary commission? Or
yeah, yeah. Well, it's a national.
Okay.
It's a national group, and we've seen the opportunity of, as I say, getting rid of about 8,000 Tory voters over to South Ribble and making West Lancashire a safe Labour seat. So we've done that. By the time we get to 97, I've got this reputation of being good on my feet, going and speaking to audiences, a good campaigner, instinctively know what messages are going to run well with the electorate, certainly in the Northwest. And so I'm running around the whole of the region, talking at meetings, advising different MPs and wannabe MPs. But also, I still had the badge of agent in West Lancashire. So as an agent, you are responsible for how much money is spent on an election campaign. And there's a limit. And let's say the limit is £10,000, just for argument's sake. So at some point during that campaign, I get a call and I'm told that a local printer, this is from the leader of the West Lancashire Labour Group, a local printer has offered us free leaflets. Well, sounds like a fantastic offer to me. So let me just check out with regional office how this works. So I phoned a guy who's the regional official, who's the oracle on election expenditure. I said, we've been offered all these free leaflets. What do you reckon? He said, well, you just put them down as a notional value. I said, a notional value? What's that mean? He said, well, basically, what are they worth to you, those leaflets? I said, well, not really worth anything. I said, we're going to win the seat. It's like we're going to walk it, so we don't need them. But the troops are getting a bit restless. We've knocked on everyone's door 10 times because I'd had that campaign machine in place for some time. So if I can keep them busy delivering leaflets, that's great. But they're not really worth anything. He said, well, you can't put nothing. He said, but just put 500 quid. So, okay, fantastic. Put 500 quid down for these leaflets. He said, and the better, because it was same year as the county council election was happening as well. So I was running for the county as well as doing all those other things. You can split the cost. 250 quid for the county election, 250 quid for the general election. Oh, fantastic. Going to stay well within the spending limits. And he gave me an example, actually, a live example of John Major was flying around in a helicopter at the time, trying to say, save Britain, or he might have done that in 92. And he put that down as £160 on his election expenses because that's what it was worth to John Major. Okay, great. So we do that, think no more about it. Win the West Lancashire constituency by 18,000 votes from a majority that had previously been 1,500. So that was a good result. A bigger swing in West Lancashire than the national swing. National swing was 8%. West Lancashire swing was 12. And I think that was testament to all the work that we put in place prior to that election campaign. And then I get on, become deputy leader, become leader of the regional assembly, doing all that other stuff with national governments as well by this point. 99, 2000, as I say, all these stories start to appear in private eye, saying we'd overspent on the election campaign.
Through a leaflet donation.
Well, they didn't specify, they just said there'd been some election fraud. I go down to Millbank, which was Labour headquarters. And by this time, there was a mate of mine called David Evans, who was the Assistant General Secretary. And I said, what do you think of this? He said, it's a load of bollocks. Forget about it. It'll all go away. It's okay. So it keeps appearing in private eye, keeps appearing. And basically became apparent that people who'd reported us to the police were Labour Party members from West Lancashire. Now, you've got a 2-year period where you can contest the spend on an election campaign. If that's done, then the Member of Parliament get caught up in the controversy as well and has to potentially stand down if you found that you have overspent. The 2 years are gone. So the party's position was, well, it's spent anyway. There's no point even investigating it, and certainly no point worrying about it. So as I say, all these stories continue to appear. Private eye started to get picked up a little bit by the local press. I really am not a worrier. I literally didn't lose a wink of sleep over this. So imagine my surprise when I'm woken up at 6 o'clock in the morning and the police raid the house on the basis of an election overspend in 1997. So this is about 2000. 2001? No, 2000. And there's a police raid on the house. I'm sort of, wow, what's going on here? I'm whizzed to Benaldswick Police Station, which is like the other end of the county. So it's like a good 2-hour drive in the police car. Meanwhile, back at home, the police are going through whatever they're going through. Do a 3-hour interview with the police and think, well, that's a waste of time. That's all gone away. And again, I should just, to add a little bit of flavour to the story, the day after that dawn raid on the house was the first election for the leader of the North West Assembly.
Right.
So I thought, that's going to be a struggle. Anyway, I won it. I won it. Because everyone who's in politics knew it was nonsense. You know, everybody's like, hey, you just don't get people getting arrested for overspending on election campaigns. It's ridiculous. So again, went back to the Labour Party, spoke to them. They were like, oh, it's a joke. Don't worry about it. Crack on. No problem at all. Continue my role as deputy leader, continue his role as leader of the Assembly, and then was elected as leader because John had decided to stand down. So I'm elected as leader of Lancashire County Council to go into the 2001 campaign. So we're all set, and I've put the strategy framework and campaign in place for the county council. I'm still working, not as closely with Colin Pickthall, but still working as part of his campaign team. So we've put the strategy and campaign together for that. And I'm driving to County Hall to speak to the Labour group just before we go to that election. And I get a phone call from the police to say CPS have decided to prosecute. So just as I'm about to go into the next stage of my political career, it all came tumbling down. And at that point, you certainly can't stay on as leader. And there's a question mark as to whether, when you've got a court case hanging over you, you can continue as a councillor. And at some point between the election happening and that phone call, I think we came to the conclusion that my political career, at least temporarily, was over.
That must have been tough and a shock. And
it was, and it was. I mean, it was a great life lesson because I tell you, thank God, whilst I was climbing up that slippery ladder, those Labour comrades aside, who obviously you do fall out in politics, but the people I've met whilst I was sort of on that journey of progression, I always felt as though, I'd treated them with respect, I'd treated them right. So you didn't get any of that sneering from people. Say, oh, great, I'm glad to see the back of him. He was an absolute tosser. I had an awful lot of people who were very, very supportive of me. A lot of people who were phoning me up saying this is a load of crap. The media were very good. So we got a lot of positive press around that time saying what a nonsense it was. But the lifesaver really was I'd already been approached prior to this by people who were looking for somebody to do consultancy work for them. And I thought, well, that's, you've got a fraud charge hanging over your head here. Not sure that's going to continue to be the case. Anyway, they did. They said to me, no, we're confident that you'll walk away from this at some point. Come and work for us. So I ended up, very fortunately, because all of my income at this point was tied up to politics. So
that you like
literally, you're paying your mortgage, you're feeding your kids with the income that you're earning as a politician. So I was very fortunate again that I had people who were quite happy to give me the benefits of the doubt and give me some consultancy work. And fortunately, it was much better money than I was on as a councillor as well. So
did you pause? I mean, that's kind of harrowing and must knock your confidence. Did you?
No,
did you kind of
I
pause?
couldn't pause. I mean, ironically, that police raid happened about 4 weeks after we'd moved into a new house in Up Holland, the posh part of Skem. And you imagine what the neighbours thought. And so, we'd only been living in that property for about a year when the CPS decided to prosecute. And you've got kids, as I say. You've just got to crack on, haven't you? You can't lick your wounds, feel sorry for yourself. And my main priority at that point was the family and making sure that we had an income that we could continue to live the lifestyle that we become accustomed. I'm not suggesting that we were living in clover, multimillionaires, but we were very comfortable, certainly far more privileged than I'd been when I was a kid from a financial perspective. And so my first instinct was to get on the phone to those people and say, are those job offers still available? This is what's happened. But what do you reckon? And immediately they said yes. And so literally the day after that decision was made by the CPS, I set up Frank McKenna Consultancy Services.
You never thought about going back into politics. You stepped back for the good of the party, for the good of your family, and
yeah. Well, you're not stepping back in a sense. You've been done in. You know, I'm not going to try and dress that up and say I thought, it's best for the Labour Party. You just think the inevitable consequence of people from your own political organisation taking again you. I can understand people trying to get you deselected or trying to get somebody to beat you for the leadership. But they tried all that. That failed. So going to the police, I think, is beyond the pale, really, particularly on trumped-up charges. And just to sort of draw a line under that particular part of my life, we went to Chester Crown Court. It was scheduled for a 12-week hearing, and we were stood in the dock of Myra Hindley and Ian Brady, which was ironic because the guy who was prosecuted alongside me, one of my colleagues, a guy called John Phillis, it was conspiracy to defraud that they ended up getting us on. And you can't conspire with yourself, so poor John got roped into it. Still to this day, don't understand why he got roped into it. And on the first day of the trial, the judge looked at the evidence and said, this is an absolute scandal. Courts are not for the place to resolve disputes within local Labour Party. Threw the case out. And the media said to me afterwards, isn't that fantastic? It's only taking you a day to clear your name. I said, well, yeah, 4 years and a day. Because by the time it got to Chester Crown Court, it had been 4 years.
It takes a lot of grit to keep going through that.
You say that, Andrew. I honestly, and people often don't believe it when I say this, I said I didn't lose a wink of sleep when I was a politician. I didn't lose a wink of sleep during any of that period of time. I think it was much tougher on the family because they're obviously seeing your career's has come to an end in terms of what you wanted to do in life. They're probably more aware of the gossip and because no smoke without fire, all that sort of thing. People don't understand. As soon as you hear the word fraud, people think there's a suggestion you've had your hand in the till. And of course, this was an overspend on an election campaign we were accused of. We were never accused of any financial benefit from a personal perspective. So I think it was tougher on the family. But for me, I was busy just carving out a new career. You've got to start again. As I say, you've got to earn a living, make sure that your family are okay. And I had the benefit of a fabulous solicitor and QC. And the QC said to me, having reviewed the evidence, I can never tell anybody when it's a jury trial that they're going to walk away because juries are funny things. He said, Mr. McKenna, I will 100% guarantee you are walking away. From that moment on, I wasn't in the least bit bothered.
So you go through all that, you're still committed to politics, you've got this consulting opportunity, and that takes you to being an entrepreneur yourself and starting up downtown, does it? Yeah,
I'm not sure whether I'm an entrepreneur. I think that term is thrown about very loosely these days. I think I'm a business leader. I think you could put that tag on me. My wife's an entrepreneur. Yeah, I think an entrepreneur is somebody who spots an opportunity, joins dots together, and all of a sudden creates this fantastic business. I'm somebody who basically was a consultant who was working eventually with about 6 or 7 property development companies in Liverpool and the 2 football clubs who were trying to develop new stadia, negotiating with Liverpool City Council officials who had this default position of saying fucking no to everything. So the opportunity I saw, and again, this came back to my own desire to try and make a difference. You know, that's what drives me. It's not about making money, it's about making a difference. And I went to the guys within the property sector I was working with, said to them, look, I'm going into the council and arguing the same things, but on an individual basis. I think we should form a trade union for property developers. And we created something called Downtown Liverpool. And that basically was where I then started to see how I could marry my political experience, my very extensive network across both the public and private sectors, and do some good in terms of making those sceptical local authority leaders understand and appreciate what they've been doing in Manchester for years and years now. That if you can get public and private sector working together and build a bridge between the two, then your economy's got a better chance of flying. So Downtown Liverpool, for me, was the thing that I thought, given my skill set, given where I am in life now, this is the best way in which I can make a difference moving forward.
Fantastic. And what was the Liverpool scene like at that point? You know, is it a lot less sophisticated than the Manchester scene? Was it different to today? We're before capital culture, I guess.
Yeah, it was 2003. So I think it was a really exciting time in the city, because I think that you had a number of younger entrepreneurs, and I will use the word in this context, who were from Liverpool and who wanted to invest in the city. And mostly it was property entrepreneurs. It was people who see there was a big gap in Liverpool. We didn't have the apartment blocks. We didn't have the great restaurants. We didn't have places where people would want to come and visit.
You need that environment to attract in investment,
absolutely.
to attract young people, to build the lifestyle, and the businesses come from there, and the growth comes.
Yeah, and I think you had a Liberal Democrat leadership in the council whose values were probably right, but they didn't necessarily have the wherewithal to get to where they needed to be. And so those first few years of Downtown Liverpool were fraught with arguments between local authority and us and the private sector. There was all sorts of things going on. The council tried to introduce a tall buildings policy, which would have basically stifled the growth of the city. I think they wanted to say you couldn't build anything higher than 6 stories, which just meant nobody would develop anything because there was no money to be made. So we campaigned against that and won that particular campaign. They did get the World Heritage Status badge, if you recall, and we campaigned against that for years and years before we got that vanity badge removed, because again that stifled development in the city. Everton's new stadium wouldn't have been built if World Heritage Status in UNESCO would have stayed in place in Liverpool. So we were campaigning against that for a long time, eventually won that campaign. We were the first business organisation to campaign for an elected mayor, initially for the city and then for the city region. We've always been big advocates of devolution, which won't surprise anybody given I wanted to be Prime Minister for the North West. Andy Burnham's got that job now, really, hasn't he? And I think that for me, what Downtown Liverpool has offered is a proposition that enables me not just to use my skill set in the best way possible, but also bring people along a journey which perhaps they wouldn't have taken if we weren't there to act as the conduit. Because from both the political side and the private sector side, people buy into us. You know, they know that instinctively I'm looking out for business, but the politicians know that we'll only work with businesses that want to do things the right way, want to genuinely invest and grow in cities and the city regions where we work. And so having that trust across the public-private sector divide, I think, is a great place for us to be.
And downtown is very much a local community of business. It's not kind of big multinational sort of vested interest sort of parachutes in it. It is people who are committed to the region, committed to the city, not just Liverpool, Manchester, Leeds. Was that a deliberate curation that you kind of went through as far as a membership?
I don't think it was. I mean, when we started, it was very much seen as a public affairs company that was working with property developers. and it's evolved into a much bigger network that now has professional services, creatives, big hospitality network within the downtown movement. And of course, we're across the country now as well. So we do have, Heathrow Airport at the latest sign up for us as a member. So we have some big businesses involved. But I think the value set of the companies that are involved with DIB is that you understand and appreciate that investment is important for the growth of the economy, and it's about community as well. So we don't tend to deal with people who are looking for a short-term gain. We deal with people who are in it for the long term, whether that be developers or, as I say, restaurants, bars, hotels, creatives. Most of the people, well, all of the people that are in the downtown network have got that sort of ethos and drive. And I think it is drive because I think their motivation is to see the places where they live, work, and have a business. They want to be seen to be helping and supporting that local economy.
So lots of business owners can I speak to, they don't want to go anywhere near politics. They just want to get on with their business. They don't see the point in engaging with the public sector or politicians. You've done a really good job of bridging that gap between local and national politicians and business people. Was that a deliberate, concerted effort from day one? Did you have to convince business owners that you need to work with politicians? They are civil servants, they are public servants, or was it just a natural group came to you that said, we get it, we want?
Yeah, I think there's a split within the network of people who join downtown because they want to meet other businesses and do B2B. And, there's an awful lot of people do business across our network now, not to do with local government or national government. But I think most people understand and appreciate that politics does matter to the environment in which you're operating in. And so if you have got a local authority in one city in the northwest that is difficult to get planning permission from, difficult to deal with in terms of development and regeneration, and then you've got a place 30 miles down the road who are basically saying, come on down,
we're open
show
to
us your money and we'll help you and support it all we can to get your development off the ground. People understand and appreciate that one of those cities is easier to invest in. And so if you've got an emotional attachment to Liverpool, you want Liverpool to make that same transformation as we've seen in Manchester for over 2 decades now. Equally, you've got businesses in Liverpool who, although they do want to see their city and city region thrive, appreciate that sometimes you've got to go beyond your city region boundaries to make a buck or two. So we work with a lot of businesses from Liverpool who work in Manchester or work in Birmingham or work in Leeds. That's just the way of the work. But in terms of trying to influence politicians and policy, I think that business leaders, business owners, generally speaking, do understand and appreciate how that is important. But equally, they'd rather me do it than them because 2 reasons. One, I probably get it a bit more than they do and can come up with the right language, for want of a better phrase. But 2, why would they want to fall out with Steve Rotherham, Liam Robinson, Andy Burnham? It's much easier if Frank falls out with them, and then the next time we put in for a planning application, nobody's going to say anything.
So this is the critical friend piece to both. Is you're the critical friend to the businesses and to the public sector and the politicians.
Yeah, more. I don't think we're critical of business much. Not within our network, because we won't work with people who, as I say, are fly-by-nights trying to make a quick buck, who don't treat the staff right. We just wouldn't take people like that on as part of our membership. So we're not particularly critical of business in that regard. We are hopefully constructively critical of local government and national government when it's not doing the right thing. I'm a Labour politician, I'm a Labour man. But doesn't mean to say my political party gets everything right. And I think that, the first year of the new government is testament to that. Do I think Rachel was right in introducing new national insurance taxes onto business. Absolutely not. It's killed SMEs. Not suggesting she did it for the wrong reasons. You know, she's inherited an absolute shit show, but a bit more thought in terms of the consequences of that decision wouldn't have gone amiss. And hopefully, you know, both through that controversy, the controversy they've had recently over the welfare reforms, will make sure that in year two, they take a bit more notice of some of the people who are saying maybe you shouldn't do it that way.
These kind of first year in government, are these natural teething pains?
I'm not sure that I think there's been a lot of self-inflicted wounds. I think that may be coming through a combination of, as I say, a really tough inheritance, inexperience, because other than Pat McFadden, I don't think there's anybody in the cabinet who's been in government before. And I think also they're trying to please a whole myriad of people and ended up upsetting everyone. So they're keeping one eye on the markets because of what happened with Liz Truss, and the Chancellor's then trying to portray herself to those people as the Iron Chancellor, and you can trust me with your money, we're not going to do anything daft. And then you've got people who naturally, the Labour supporters and Labour MPs, saying, well, we've got to put more money into health, we've got to put more money into education, we've got to put more money into public services. At some point, you've got to have a strategy in place where you're able to do that in a much more thoughtful and planned way than appears to have been the case the first year of this government. And I think the criticism I'd make of them is they've tried to rush things through. They've implemented policies without, as I say, thinking of the unintended consequences. And I could give you a list of things, I'm not going to, of great things they've done in year one, actually. But I'd say they've been better at doing things than they have been at politics.
And they're doing things in probably one of the most changing environments globally. You've got Trump in the US, you've got Ukraine, we've all got economic stagnation. It's not just isolated to the UK, so they are operating in a difficult environment.
Yeah, I can make a load of excuses for them, but it doesn't help them because people out there, politics will almost become like football management. You know, years ago, if you were a football manager, you come to Everton, basically get 3 seasons, right? Now you get 3 games, and the fans are hunting to get you out. And I think politics has become similar. I'm not saying this is good, but it's just a fact. And if you consider that since 2008, we've had, 6, 7 prime ministers? And prior to that, from 1979 to 2008, we have 4. That shows you, I think, the challenge, the complexity, the difference between trying to lead a government now than in the past. And I think that you can have every sympathy with whoever the Prime Minister is. You know, I thought Sunak was trying to do the right thing on more than one occasion. I think he made some critical errors, not least the cancellation of HS2, but nonetheless, I think he was in it for the right reasons. I think Keir Starmer is in it for the right reasons and is trying to do a good job. But I just think that they've shown a degree of political naivety in this first 12 months, and they've got to get that right because people out there won't be forgiving and saying, oh, well, yeah, it was really bad, that, what you've inherited. You can say about 14 years of Tory rule, you can say against the backdrop of the geopolitical environment that we find ourselves in. But if you're not making that positive difference to people's lives, they really don't care. And I think my fear now is that the way we conduct political discourse in this country, it's very black and white. So you're asking me earlier about what's the difference in terms of how we used to do politics. I think most people used to understand that most things aren't black and white, they're grey. But I think since the advent of social media, particularly Twitter, everyone has to take a place, don't they? You know, you don't have the space within the confines of a social media platform to say, well, on the one hand, but on the other, it's like, I hate Israel and I love Palestine, or I hate Palestine. You can't say, well, actually, it's a bit more complex and complicated than that. And equally, I think our voters are looking for almost instant gratification from politicians rather than understanding and appreciating that actually where the country is at the moment, this is a 10-year fix. It's not a one parliament fix. It's certainly not a 1 year fix. It's a 10-year fix. But the voters rolled the dice with Brexit. Don't be surprised if they roll the dice with Farage.
Have we gone from that mindset where people believe something, but they're open to the possibility that they're not right? So, on the information I've got, I believe this, but I might not be right. I might not understand everything. To it's become faith. It's not that I believe it, and you can argue with me. I know this is the truth. I don't believe this. I know it's the truth, and you're clearly wrong. And I've got a whole algorithm behind me pushing that I am correct and you're wrong. Do you think devolution's an antidote to that? Is devolution coming along at the worst possible time when we've got challenging economy, we've got this polarization in politics, and this complete disruption of what were traditionally safe pillars or safe assumptions? Is devolution part of the solution, or is it the wrong time for devolution?
Let me unpick that, because that's a big question. I mean, firstly, in terms of whether people are more stringent in their political views now, probably they operate in echo chambers. So if you go onto somebody's social media feed, they tend to be following people who agree with them. They'll tweet something that people will then just re-emphasise, yeah, you're right as far as that's concerned. And that's not great for democracy, because an awful lot of people don't watch the news, don't look at the viewing figures for Question Time now. It used to be about 8 million down to 2. Sunday morning programmes with the political commentators, similarly, poor audiences now. So people are tending to get their political discourse from their social media platforms, whether it be Facebook, whether it be Twitter or something else. And of course, in those circumstances, you are operating in that echo chamber, and it's dangerous. So I think that's a problem. I haven't got the answer to how we tackle that. In terms of the devolution question, I think that you're coming at it from the worst possible position if you're just simply looking at who's going to be the mayor. So we've just had the first Reform mayor elected. And you'd say that's a fucking disaster, because who wants to see populist mayors in place? However, if those mayors had genuine power rather than soft power, I think two things would happen. Firstly, the turnout for those elections would be much greater than they are, because I think they're bobbling around 30% in terms of the electoral turnout for mayoral elections, which is scandalous.
It's not a huge mandate.
Scandalous. But secondly, even people, the most powerful mayor in the country, arguably, both in terms of profile but also the powers he's been given, is Andy Burnham. But
not Sadiq Khan.
No, because Sadiq is having to deal with all those London boroughs and has to get an awful lot of things agreed by them before he can do them. Now Andy's got the Greater Manchester family that he has to deal with, but he's still got a lot of independence and soft power because he's Andy Burnham. He's great with the media. He's Labour's best retail politician. But he's not got fiscal freedom. So he would say to you, let's take that skills and education agenda because it's the one that drives me mad most. He's been given about 20% of what Greater Manchester spends on education and training, and he's told that's devolution.
Okay.
Now, he should be given at least 70%, if not 100%, in my view. Similar with welfare benefits. Why aren't we channeling those benefits to those combined authorities, to those mayors, to those local authority leaders who would be able to establish an infrastructure where you can have face-to-face interviews with people who think they should be getting a PIP, who would be able to start to signpost people into education, training, apprenticeship opportunities if they had the budgets to do that. If Andy could utilise his significant asset base to borrow against. These are the sort of things that if mayors were allowed to do them, people would say, that's a serious job. And actually, we need somebody in that job who's going to deliver on these big, life-changing, transformational policy issues. But if you're basically seeing those mayoral elections as whether you should give the government a kicking or not, then you're going to get a Reform mayor. Reform ain't beating Andy Burnham, by the way. But they might beat some of the other Labour mayors. So I think devolution needs to go faster, it needs to go deeper. They need to devolve more powers, more fiscal responsibilities to the mayors. And in the end, if you end up with, whether it be Reform, whether it be Conservative, it's local people who are making that decision. So if they want a populist mayor, then they're entitled to have it. I don't think it's the right decision, but they're entitled to make it. But don't be giving people the opportunity of voting for someone who you're giving a list of objectives to and saying to them, we want you to deliver that, but with one arm tied behind your back. And that's what we're doing at the moment with mayors.
So you've got a dangerous period then between decentralising and giving more authority to mayors and the electorate catching up and going, this is serious, this is us kind of controlling our own destiny. How would you as a communicator bridge that divide of saying, okay, we're gonna take the risk, we're gonna give more authority to devolve powers and give them more of the budget, but we need to make the population understand that this is serious. If it goes off the rails, there's no insurance policy. How would you go about promoting that devolution piece to businesses and to general public?
Difficult, because I don't think of all the things that you'd list as strengths of the current government, you would say communication is one of them. So they do need to have a reset in terms of their communication strategy, and they need to start to tell a much better story across the piece, not just on devolution. I think you've got to get people like Andy Burnham, Tracy Brabin, Kim McGuinness up in the northeast. You've got to give them profile, and you've got to get them to tell that story and say these are the sort of things that we can deliver. And it may be the way I will do this, and it doesn't mean it's going to happen. My suggestion is that you pick probably Manchester, Birmingham, maybe the northeast, and make them pilot projects. You've got, just coincidentally, it's not because of this, but you coincidentally have got 3 Labour mayors in those areas. Andy Burnham, Kim, as I've said, and Richard Parker in the West Midlands. And you basically go Devo plus, much more than they say. They've got better devolution deals in Birmingham and Manchester than anywhere else than they have, but it's still nowhere near what it needs to be. And you say, we're going to run these as pilot projects. And you, for 2 or 3 years, allow Andy Burnham to show people what you can do with those powers. And you say, does everyone want to look like Greater Manchester? Because if you do, what this means is giving these additional powers to your locality, to your region, and then it's up to you as to whether you want to put somebody like Andy Burnham in charge, or do you want to put someone in charge who wants to stop the boat and stop DEI? What the priorities are. Your priorities about growing the economy and taking the political environment we're in seriously, or is it about slogans and soundbite? So maybe the way to do this is to, as I say, have a series of pilot projects, be serious about it though, throw significant resource and power at Andy, at Richard, at Kim, and in 3 years' time see where we go. And if they make a mess of it, this is the other thing, isn't it? We as devolutionists may have to say, oof, maybe that's not the model at all. But I think
a new one on me, devolutionist. Is that one you've just coined, or is that
might just be a new word?
Is that an opportunity for us to kickstart growth? You think that should be something the current government should be looking at? Is if we need growth, we need to empower the regions.
Listen, the economy in this country, and this isn't me. I'm not an economist, but you don't have to be an economist to recognise the disparity that exists across our country between the southeast and the rest of the UK,
If you live in London,
country.
you're 280 grand richer than if you're in the north. I think was the figure. The disposable income's
look
about
at
6 grand higher.
lifespan. You look at any measurement, and if you're in the southeast, you've got much better life chances. The investments are still going in there now. There's an inevitability about your capital city getting a lot of investment, and London is hugely important to UK PLC. So I'm not one of those people who advocates like take everything away from London and give it to the regions. My message to the government is allow the regions to raise their own finance, allow the regions to win their own investment, allow the regions to create their own stories, their own narrative. Manchester's a very different place to Liverpool. It's a very different place to Leeds, very different case. They will all take different approaches as city regions if they're given the opportunity to do so. Problem they've got at the moment is 80% of the money they're giving, they're told where to spend it by Whitehall. There's no flexibility. You can't be innovative. You can't take a lead on a particular initiative because actually if it doesn't fit with that criteria that the Whitehall Mandarin tells you it needs to fit in, you ain't getting the money. So in terms of, I hate the phrase now because Johnson abused it, but in terms of levelling up the economy, then I think the only way to do that is to take power from Whitehall and put it into the regions. We've tried everything else in a sense. We've tried
to been regenerating for 50 years. And
and it's, and we've tried all the beauty contests, haven't we? Well, bid for this and the best bid gets this and all of those sort of things. And then we tried the silver bullet in a sense, which was HS2, and we failed to deliver it. We're just crap at delivering big infrastructure projects in this country. Again, I would argue that had you have said to the regions, right, your responsibility, Andy and Steve, is to build the Liverpool-Manchester bit, or even involve Tracy in that and add Leeds onto it. Richard, you're responsible, or Andy Street as it was in the time, you're responsible for making sure it happens in the Midlands, and devolve those powers and let them handle the local process stations and all those things that made that project spiral out of control as far as cost was concerned. I think it'd have been a better managed project. I think it would have been delivered. So we've got to do something different from what we've done over the last 50, 60, 70 years. And I think part of that is about devolution to the regions. The other side of this same coin, though, it is a radical change in terms of the way we do business at Westminster. So I mentioned the fact I spent 7 years in Westminster as a political advisor. And by the end of that time, I'd come to the conclusion that I never wanted to be a Member of Parliament. It is the most thankless job on the planet. I can't understand. I've got mates who are MPs. I've got mates who want to be MPs. I try and talk them out of it every single day. It's a really, really tough job. It's a tougher job now because of the social media stick they get, but it's a tough job because I just think they've become super councillors. You don't really have on a day-to-day basis any power to change things. And you've got to be in the Commons to vote when we've got all these things that say you can vote remotely. No, you've got to be in the council chamber. You've got to line up
in the lobby,
in this antiquated way, in this lobby. You've got to basically drink the Westminster Kool-Aid. You've got to be around the tea room. You've got to, it's so antiquated. No wonder we don't have the calibre of parliamentarian that we used to have. Because people won't put up with that these days. That's not a lifestyle. Imagine if you're an MP in Scotland. Here's your life. So you travel down probably to London to Westminster on Sunday. You get to Westminster late Sunday night. You go to bed. You're up Monday. You're in Parliament. There might be a debate that you're interested in. Probably isn't. So you go to your office and you'll do some casework.
This is constituency
casework. You'll have a cup of coffee. You might meet some people who are down from your constituency. You might show them around Westminster. So you're basically a tourist guy, right? You might then get wheeled in to speak at a debate if you're lucky, or you might be on a select committee, and that might be quite an interesting piece of work. You'll go into the chamber, you'll do Prime Minister's questions and boo and hiss at the opposition. You'll come out of there, you'll hope that there is only a one-line whip on the Thursday, so you can get an early dart. But if it's a two-line or a three-line whip, you'll have to stay Thursday as well, in which case you travel back on the Friday. Friday night, you see your family. and that's great. Kiss your wife goodnight or your husband. You go to sleep, you're knackered. Saturday morning, you wake up, you go and do an advice surgery. Saturday afternoon, you do another advice surgery because you've got to stay close to your constituents. You can't be seen to be totally tied up with that Westminster bubble. Sunday, you spend with your family, you have Sunday lunch. Sunday night, you're back on the train. Eat, sleep, repeat. Who wants to do that? Who wants to do that? Chances of you being a government minister, there's about 10, 12 people in government who really make a difference. Now, I think we need less MPs. We need a much more modern way of making decisions in Parliament. The way we do it at the moment is absolutely scandalous. Why have we still got a House of Lords? It's an unelected chamber. I'm not suggesting we shouldn't have a checks and balances chamber, but it should be elected again on a regional basis. And then you devolve a lot of those powers to mayors so that you don't need as many MPs. So that's my sort of very revolutionary evolution of how politics needs to go in this country. But if you continue to do the same thing and expect different results, I think it was a fella called Einstein said that you're kidding yourself. There has not been any radical change to the way we've done politics in this country since the war. And our decline since the war has been consistent.
That's an interesting observation. And the system is Victorian by its nature. It was designed for wealthy individuals, landowners, aristocrats to
nobody
legislate.
loves Westminster and the pomp and the glamour of the place than I love, we did a parliamentary reception that you attended recently, Andrew. It's fantastic. That you've stood on the terrace, you've got all this. You can feel the power going, you seeping out of the walls. But is that really the way in which a modern 21st century society ought to be governed? I would argue probably not. The idea that you've got a green carpet for the Commons, a red carpet for the Lords. Lords are wearing these big robes, it's from another time, isn't it? And if people are saying young people particularly feel alienated from politics, is it any wonder? Can you imagine saying to your kids, well, what these people who are paying £80,000 a year, which isn't enough, by the way, to go down to London so they can stand in that queue to vote on this piece of legislation because we won't allow them to do it online. They just look at you as though you're daft, wouldn't they? But that's what we expect people to do. And we expect people to be away from the family all week and then be normal and not become alcoholics or not have affairs or not do all of these things that, some MPs, not lots of them, but some MPs, unfortunately get caught up in. And again, I'll go back to the name Andy Burnham, whether Andy's got any ambitions to go back to Westminster or not. But the very fact that he wanted to get out, I think tells you an awful lot of the problems and challenges of our politics. Because if national government and national politics isn't for Andy Burnham,
the system's broken.
Then there's a problem, isn't there?
We're really good at creating systems that break people. You look at the NHS as well. You wouldn't want your kids to be a doctor. You've got that. You start off with kids say, I want to help people. I want to be a doctor. I want to be a firefighter. I want to be a policeman. I want to be a soldier. And you're like, they are even childmind. They are the most thankless jobs.
Yeah.
When did we get to the point where we made a system that made the most noble professions and the most important ones to society the ones you'd say, no, don't do that. That's not good for you.
Yeah.
Going on to the devolution thing, then you've got this dysfunctional system, archaic system. We've got the devolution piece. Your observation about the Lords being regional, I've never heard that before. I think that's a great idea. The second.
Well, there's not many Northerners in the Lord.
Never thought of it that way either. How do we go about getting the best caliber of people into that devolved system? How do you inspire the next generation? How do you take the bright young stars who are coming up now and saying, Westminster, there is an alternative. Come and run things. Be a leader in the devolved regions. You've got experience of being one of those hot shots coming up. What would you do to create the top caliber of civil servants, of politician in the regions?
It's really difficult because, as I say, from when I was involved in politics to now, it's a lot different. We didn't have social media. And I don't know how I'd have coped with that, because it's easy to say, well, just stay off it, but if you know somebody's going after you on a particular platform, then good luck with that, really, particularly someone of my character. I used to hate it when someone would write a letter to the Skem advertiser slagging me off. So I think that somehow, some way, we've got to get people to respect our politicians again. And some people will say, well, it's a two-way street, and I accept that in a sense it is. But in every walk of life, you're going to get people who make mistakes or who don't do the right thing. And I would argue that there's no more bad politicians than there are in any other profession. So that's the first thing. But yet, respect for politicians, once again, to be seen as, you said earlier, comment, your mum and dad must have been really proud. I wonder whether people are really proud when the son or daughter comes home now and says, I'm going to be a politician. Or whether mum and dad just has their head in their hands and go, oh, you don't want to do that.
Yeah.
Don't be doing that. I think remuneration is never the reason why people go into politics, but I still think it's important, because I think it shows how serious we are about treating politicians as professional. And again, if you go back to the days when Parliament started, the reason why the Tories ran this country for hundreds of years is because it was a voluntary job. And of course, if you're a solicitor or a barrister or in London, then that was fine. You working class lad from Durham, you couldn't afford to become an MP. Equally now, I think if you are to be serious about devolution, decentralisation, local government, then those local politicians need to be remunerated better than they are currently. As I say, none of them in for that reason. The reason most of them in it for, same reason I was in it, is to make a difference. So give them the power to make a difference. And if people feel as though they've got a genuine opportunity of going into that job and making a big difference to the place where they care about, you will attract the right calibre of people. And that goes back to why we're not necessarily getting those people attracted to Parliament, because you ain't got much chance of making a difference in Parliament.
Hard life, no power to make real change.
Not really. Yeah. I always, people used to say to me, what would be your ideal job in Parliament? Meaning, cabinet role. I used to advise it to the Prime Minister. Yeah, it's better paid. It's less of a profile. It's getting more profile than it should these days, but it's less of a profile. If Morgan McSweeney went into a pub in Liverpool, which he will in September during conference season, very few people in that room recognising him. So he's got his own private life. Advice to the Prime Minister is where you should be going if you're interested in the future of politics and you want big influence.
Good advice for young people coming up. Are there any democracies that are doing new systems well? I think of places like Korea and some kind of East Asian countries. Are there any countries that have got a better model than us, or an alternative model to this sort of antiquated way of doing things, do you think? Or do we need new ideas in how we lead countries and governments?
I think if you talk about devolution and you are genuinely committed to that way of governance, as I am, then you basically say, in the UK, we've got to do it ourselves. We've got to come up with a system that suits us, because one size doesn't fit all. So just because something might work in Singapore or something might work in Korea doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work in the UK. So I do think we've got to come up with our own system. I think that you would, up until the last 10 years, have always held the American model up as the best sort of idea of where you've got checks and balances.
The one that always sticks in my mind is when the UN rebuild a country, they don't use the American constitutional presidential model. It goes to a parliamentary model.
Well, I was going to say, I think what's been apparent over the last, probably since Obama, really, because he started to push back, is there's probably too many checks and balances. And then, of course, you get a president in who just wants to rip the Constitution up, and they're finding it very difficult to cope with that. So I would have always said previously that the American system is a good starting point. I wouldn't necessarily say that now. I think you've just got to start again. You've got to understand and appreciate some of the traditions that we've got in this country. there's a big debate to be had in terms of the electoral system and whether first past the post works in a multi-party system that we've got now. You know, two-party, first past the post, yeah, of course, that makes sense.
Is that a pressure release valve for the polarisation that's come with social media and politics in general? If you move to
in terms of the
transferable
multi-party,
votes, or in terms of going first past the post, if you take first past the post off the deck, out the deck, is that a way to relieve some of that pressure of polarisation?
I don't know. I mean, I'll be very Liberal Democrat on this issue and say I'm sat on the fence. I can see the sense in terms of saying people will feel as though they've been better represented through a fairer voting system, if I can put it that way. The problem that I have with proportional systems is basically look at an awful lot of countries across Europe and see how they've been stymied from making any progress at all. So you never get the government you want. You always get a compromise. Very unstable usually. I think Italy had 38 governments in about 20 years at one point. I know Maloney's been in post for 3 years now, but prior to that, it was a bit of a dog's breakfast. Germany, you've got these grand coalitions where basically, if it was here, it'd be the Conservatives and the Labour Party in coalition. Does that sit comfortably with people? So I think you'd have to have a proportional system for me that still enabled you to have firm government, which was able to carry through its manifesto commitments. Very unlikely that you're going to get anybody having more than 50% of the vote. So I don't know, maybe a hybrid. You know, again, there's models I've seen in the past where you have list systems. So you do actually have a vote for a prime minister. The prime minister still selects their cabinet. The cabinet doesn't necessarily have to come from other members of parliament. That's quite an interesting notion, but that's something that's been mooted as well. And then a list system of where you vote for not necessarily on a constituency basis, but on a regional basis. And again, we did this for the European elections for some time. We ended up getting UKIP. So be careful what you wish for.
Frank, you're a great commentator as well. So alongside the lobbying work you do with Downtown and the support for business, Totally Frank column, it gives great insight. You've got the podcast, which is as good as Alistair Campbell and Rory Stewart's. Where does that communication, that sort of written and presentational skills come from? How did you get into the broadcasting bit?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, actually. So when I was at school, used to get to what was third year back in my day.
Year 9?
Probably now, isn't it? And you took options.
Yep.
So when we got to that point, I went to a school in Skelmersdale called St. Richard's, which was affectionately known as Animal House. So when we got to the fourth year, as it was then, you took your options. I ended up in drama, bizarrely. So there was a reason for me wanting to do drama. And again, I said earlier, it was football and girls in a sense, and all the girls were going to do drama. So I thought, actually, that's not a bad shout. And surprisingly, I was only one of 3 lads who was in the drama class. So that option was taken for all the wrong reasons, but actually it gave me a great skill set that I'd never have been able to get had I not taken that option. My dad was fuming with me because I didn't do computer studies at the time. So, but on a serious note, I'd always been relatively comfortable speaking publicly, so I was always the one who was chosen for reading assemblies or reading it. I'm a Catholic, so reading at the Nativity play or being Joseph or all those sort of things. So I'd always been confident and comfortable in terms of public speaking and so on. But I think what drama gives you is a different type of skill set in terms of timing, in terms of being able to learn a script, and just in terms of, again, building your confidence, because inevitably end up talking to people who you've never met before. You doing plays in front of audiences, all that sort of thing. Now, it was an interesting thing Andy Burnham said when I did the first interview with him and Steve Rotherham after they'd both been elected as mayors. He thinks drama should be part of the national curriculum. Like, shouldn't be an option. You should have to do drama. Because when he went to Oxford, he said the striking difference between him and all the other guys who were there was that they were all very confident, and he put that down to drama. I think he ended up doing drama at Oxford at an amateur level, at least. So I think that helped. I've always been good at writing, fortunately. So I wanted, when I went to college, did A-level English, and I wanted to be a journalist. That was my ambition. I haven't realised that I wasn't good enough to be the next Bobby Charlton or George Best. So I want to be a sports journalist, obviously, and then fell into politics through a whole range of reasons that we've already touched upon, but mostly at college, the debate in society, which all colleges have, I guess. I used to be put up to argue particular cases and found that enjoyable as much as anything else. And also learned at a relatively young age that I was quite persuasive. And this sounds as though I have absolutely no doubts about my own self-ability whatsoever, and that would be absolutely right, Andrew. So when I was, I think, probably about 12 or 13, we were in a classroom situation. The teacher said, right, who believes that in an eye for an eye? And yeah, it's a Catholic school, so we're all aware of these biblical phrases. Everyone's hand sort of shoots up. So if somebody is found guilty of murder, who believes that we should reintroduce capital punishment? And again, flurry of hands go up, and mine doesn't. And the teacher comes to me and says, well, why don't you think we should have capital punishment? And I go on to explain that there've been cases in the UK where the wrong person had been found guilty of murder and subsequently hung, and then, you know, obviously you can't bring them back. Blah, 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 blah. Imagine if that was your mum or dad. And then he took the vote again, and there'd been a total switch. So from that moment on, I was always going to be a politician, really, wasn't I? The reason I tell that story is that when something like that happens to you at such a young age, you do think, I'm able to talk people into it.
That feel like it
a good
clicked
salesperson, aren't
yeah.
you? That's all you are.
But
You're a good salesperson.
did you consciously feel something click when the teacher kind of asked you that, you gave your justification, and then she redid the vote? Did you went, oh wow, that's
I was
get
surprised.
that now.
I was surprised because
So you're how old at this point?
I was about 12.
And something in your head clicks and goes,
Yeah.
okay, you research something, you articulate it well, you can change people's minds.
Yeah. And you know, as I say, that there was no formal training. As I say, went on to do drama, which I think helped.
Does that come from your dad's politics as well? If you've been talking,
my dad was on the
politics at
stage,
home?
you know, when he was a
Okay.
kid. So he was a singer. So he was in something called the Dudley Dale Gang, and used to go on the concert halls. But again, you know, once he got to 15, he could go and earn a few bob. If you're a bootle buck, as my dad was, then you're just going out to work. But yeah, he was a performer. He was an extrovert, a great sense of humour. So I definitely got part of that from him, I'm sure. But I think when you've got that self-confidence, that's a tremendous asset to have. And again, it is luck. You know, not everybody's born like that. And some people say it's arrogance. Some people say it's, you're a big head. Listen, I can take the piss out of myself. You know, I don't consider myself to be a big head, but am I self-confident? I think you've got to be if you're in the line of work that I'm in. But again, going on from, I mean, there's an interesting thing. Yeah, I'm conscious that I'm going all over the place in a sense with this conversation, but I think all this ties in together. So why was I able to make that case to those group of kids? And it was because there'd been a television drama made about a guy who had been hung, who subsequently was found to be mentally ill. I think he was one of the last men ever hung in the UK. And I never forget, it was BBC drama, and it was called Let Him Have It.
Right.
And the guy, I think it was a London incident, the guy who shot the policeman was underage, so couldn't be hung. He was like 16. The guy who said, let him have it, was, although mentally ill, 18. And obviously the Home Secretary at the time, policeman shot, hung the guy, right? That was the stuff. And that was what sort of triggered that conversation in the classroom. Let him have it, by the way. The argument was, and subsequently was proved, he was saying to his mate, let the policeman have the gun.
Right.
Not let him have it, as in shoot him. So that sort of stuck with me as a story. Then, why do I tell that story? Because my dad and my mum always let me stay up late and watch the telly. And everybody goes, what's a terrible thing to do to your children? So I used to watch things like Michael Barnes and talk shows and political programmes and those really interesting dramas that the BBC used to be famous for. And so an awful lot of, I think, my political thinking, but also my performative ability, if I can put it that way, comes from just watching a lot of telly. And people say, that's a terrible thing to do. Why wouldn't they have you reading books or doing your homework? But my mum and dad were very comfortable having me around watching the telly. And so when I come into this new sort of role as running an events-led business to an extent, which Downtown in Business is, of course we do the politics, but of course a lot of the way in which we engage with politicians is through events. And it's me interviewing politicians. Now, I think there's two strengths in that regard. One, I've been on the other side, so I sort of know instinctively how to get the best out of people because I know what I'd like to be asked. But secondly, I always think back to people like Michael Parkinson and Jonathan Ross and those guys who were brilliant interviews, and you learn from that as well. So the television, not a bad place to start in terms of.
And I'd go the same.
Better than TikTok, that's for sure.
It's not the medium; it's what you're watching. And if you're watching kind of those more cerebral programs, you get an insight into the grown-up world.
And we ended up, we did a radio program for 6 years. We do lots of stuff with the press and with the media, and that sounds like a fucking nuts answer in terms of where all that came from. But I think it's a whole combination of all of those things and all of those ingredients that sort of makes me, as I say, very comfortable in terms of whether it's doing an interview, interviewing somebody, or going on to the media.
That's something we're missing with the next generation. To me, it's always something. It's in your teenage years, that confidence of when you're a younger kid gets knocked out of you between kind of peer groups and hormones, or the rest of it gets knocked out of you by the time you get to an adult. Is that something we need to be working harder on with young people?
Yeah, I think Andy's got onto something. I think drama is a great way in which you can introduce people to do performance, to take themselves out of the comfort zone, to publicly speak, to write. That drama isn't just about performing, is it? It's about writing, it's about lighting, it's about editing. There's loads of different skill sets that you've got to have in drama. So I think drama would be a good starting point. My 17-year-old is a fantastic singer. She's a great actor. She's at Lipper now. And, just a natural performer, but she's okay academically. She gets by. But we've been fortunate enough to be able to afford for her to follow that path, that career journey. Not sure that there's kids out there who've got probably similar, if not better talents, who are given that opportunity. So I do think we need to be more flexible in terms of our education system and not be as stringent around this idea that everybody's got to be great at maths, science, and the core subjects. I have not got any qualification relating to maths to my name, not even a CSE. Never mind an O-level or an A-level. So I'd have been screwed, wouldn't I? Because now a lot of people say you got to have maths, you got to have English, you got to. So I think we've just go back to my old hobby horse in a sense. I think we've got to if we've got to radically change the way in which our political and governance system runs, then equally I think radical reform of our education system is required.
I think this Parliament will have the wherewithal or the bandwidth to tackle that one.
No, and I'm not sure any Parliament can. I think, again, that needs to be something where you say to your mayors, you've got to try and come up with an educational system that suits your region.
So Liverpool, something Steve Rotherham is looking at is the use of AI in schools.
And Steve is good at this, isn't he? Because he went through the apprentice route and recognises that there are alternatives to university degrees, to being able to forge a future for yourself. So hopefully there will be some flexibility moving forward. And it's getting a bit better, but I still think that we're teaching, a lot of it. I've got an 11-year-old as well, and she comes home with homework not massively dissimilar to what I was doing. Well, that can't be right, can it?
Goes back to your observation about systems again, isn't it? It's those teachers want to do things differently, but the system says
Ofsted
this is the way.
Tells them they've got to, doesn't it? I'd introduce a system where people, teachers, schools were given far more credit for the social impact they have on people, as well as simply how many boxes can we tick in terms of the number of exams that they passed. Because, for me, and I was a governor at Liverpool College for time, being able to get some of those kids through maths and English, which is essential now to go into any sort of job, getting them to turn up 70% of the time was an achievement. But you try telling that to Ofsted. Oh, no, that's terrible. That's a mark off you. Where's the incentive for higher educational, further educational institutions or schools themselves to work in a more innovative, flexible way? If some prat from London's going to come in with a pencil and says computer says no, people say to me, schools should do more with business. Well, teachers get 0 credit for doing more with business. 0 credit. Doesn't mean some of them don't do it, but they don't get any credit for it. Same with sports activity. Or say if a school said, right, what we're going to do is we've got a lot of kids in this school, not great at maths, some of them not brilliant at English, but I'll tell you what, some talented kids here, great actors, good public speaker. We're going to set up a drama school after school. Say that to Ofsted. Well, doesn't matter. Doesn't tick any boxes there. So basically, you're not an outstanding school. You're not even a good school. You're a poor school. You know where I'm coming from. Yeah, I'm over-labouring the point in a sense. But that's got to be seen as being something we can improve upon, surely.
I think the point about drama and the creative arts in life, in business, we find that a lot is one of the first things you've got to get on into the head of a young graduate or somebody coming into the organisation is that ability to communicate with people and that self-confidence. You need that mix of technical skills and performance in any business to be successful.
One of the biggest gaps that we've got in business in this country is sales. People who are good at selling. Is there a college or university course out there? Come and learn how to sell. Right? We've got a brilliant guy called Andy Bounds, and there's lots of them, lots of Andy Bounds about Liverpool land, who could sell sand to the Arabs and teaches it, but he teaches it to Google and, the multi-million. Get Andy Bounds to come into our colleges once a week, and do a sales class with kids. They'd love it, and so would he. It's just thinking a little bit more, as I say, flexibly, a bit more innovatively about how we get the best out of our kids. Not all going to be great at maths, not all going to be great at science. Can't all go into AI. Some kids don't like computers. Some people, amazingly, some kids don't like phones. Most of them do, but some of them don't. What do we do with them? I tell you, if I could get a good salesperson, I'd give you my right arm. So hard to come by. Give me a kid who can come into my workplace and is comfortable picking up the phone and speaking to people. Not texting, not WhatsApping, not emailing. Somebody will actually pick the phone up and say, hello, Mrs. Jones, we've got an event next week. Are you still able to come? Because, Andrew, I can't tell you how many times I've had to have conversations with our events team over the years to say, did you remind Andrew about that event? Because he's a really busy guy and he might want to come, but he's not shown up. Did you remind him that that event was on? Yeah. When did you speak to him? I emailed him. Oh, fuck it. It drives me mad. So if you give me a kid who comes out of school and goes, I can go and talk to them. I can talk to them. Give me 10 of them any day of the week than someone who comes in with a degree in fucking origami or whatever it might be.
That's we hear that from so many people. Is just picking up the phone is
just be personable.
It's a bizarre generational divide. Is people will text you in business.
Yeah.
You know, before they know you, they'll send you text.
They're sat next to you.
Yeah. That's just my colleagues that do that. So Labour Party, we're about a year in. Labour's original priorities: growth, energy, crime, inequality, the NHS. I think. How are we doing?
Small agenda.
Yeah.
So I think this splits into two things. I think the longer term things they've done well. So they're starting to invest in infrastructure, which was hugely important, but they're not going to get any credit for that, possibly in this Parliament. Certainly not for the next 3 or 4 years, because all of those things take time to get off the ground. Similarly, even if they start to make changes to that devolution agenda, as we've discussed, that will take time to bed in. And these are all longer term strategies that will take significant time for them to come to fruition, and therefore for any government or political party to take credit for. There's been a big investment into the NHS. Some will say that was much needed. My disappointment is that there hasn't been enough modernisation and reform put in place in terms of incentivising people to change before they get that cash, draw down that money. So that's a bit of a concern to me, to be honest. In terms of some of the bigger changes that the government needs to make, such as social care provision, welfare reform, I think they're going to be challenged, as we've seen recently with that debate over the small change to the welfare budget. So again, for context, our welfare bill by 2030 is going to be £380 billion, the current projection. The Chancellor wanted to shave £5 billion off that, and MPs didn't have the bottle to do it. So that's a problem that's not going to go away anytime soon. Social care, we've got an ageing population, and we don't want any immigrants. So you tell me how we're going to pay for all those elderly people, keep them safe, keep them well, keep them as healthy as we possibly can. That's going to be a big challenge, and I don't think, again, any party is bold enough to go there yet. That means inheritance tax, I'm afraid, going up, and a tax on not income but wealth may have to be looked at, and people in this country don't like that.
Stevenson stuff?
No.
Okay.
No, I've heard of him, and I think he's probably more radical than I am on that side of things. I don't think you can tax people in the traditional way we think about tax any more than we are now, because the tax take will go down this year. People who are really in that position where they're paying more than 50%, they just don't think it's fair. I don't think it's fair. So
I think Jimmy Carr does this gag where he says he does 2 shows a night. Does the first show for the tax man and then the second show for himself.
Yeah, and obviously we all wish we had Jimmy Carr's money, but you can see where people are coming from. You've got to be able to get that balance right. So they've got to find a new way of raising money, and obviously one of the ways is to grow the economy, so you get more tax that way. But for social care, that is a big, big number. And if you remember, the last Prime Minister to try and tackle that seriously was Theresa May, and it basically lost her an election and lost her a Prime Ministership eventually. So that's a big issue that politicians don't want to go near. And I think the other thing that you may have some sympathy with, simply because of your job, is we've got to start to find a way in which we prioritise young people as much as we prioritise pensioners. The triple lock's got to go. It's probably one thing Kemi Badenoch has said since she became leader of the Conservative Party that I agree with. Why do pensioners always get the cream off the cake and young people can't afford to get on the housing ladder. You've got to find a way of helping young people and saying to pensioners, if you earn £35,000 a year, don't feel as though you're entitled to a winter fuel allowance. If inflation is running at 25%, don't think that your pension needs to go up by 25%. You know, I'm being simplistic, but you've got to start to move away from this obsession of more pensioners vote, and so we can't touch anything that goes there.
It's a weird disconnect because most of those pensioners in their personal lives, if you're a parent, if you said, who do you want to look after first, you or your kids or your grandkids, most individuals would say, well, I want the best for my grandchildren, I want the best for my kids. But when we get to the conversation at national level about pensions, it goes out the window. I don't get that. To me seems like a communications thing.
I think often it's headline read rather than led by the pensioners themselves. The Daily Mail, the Daily Telegraph, largely read by pensioners.
I remember when my dad was, as a pensioner, I remember my dad's stock phrase was, I'm on a fixed income, son. I was like, do you have any idea how many young people in their 20s would kill to be on a fixed income? It was just that generational divide.
Yeah, and I think for years we've had this situation, haven't we, where we've said, well, you've got to look after the people who fought the war for us. But they're all dead now.
Yeah.
Not to put it crudely. And when are we going to start thinking about young people again? So I think there needs to be a shift in that. But all of those things, these are the things I think should happen. It's easy for me as a commentator to say those are the things that they should be fixing. Far more difficult when you're looking at poll ratings, when you've got MPs screaming at you because they want to save the seat for the next election. All of those challenges that we as commentators don't have to think about. The Prime Minister and government ministers do.
I think you've made the observations that the best way out of poverty is work, and the best way out of our national stagnation is got to be growth and enterprise. So on that then, kind of business heroes for you, who do you admire? Who do we need more of in the UK?
That's a great question. I mean, there's a couple of people who I've worked alongside who've massively impressed me. Gary Neville is one. So obviously an ex-footballer, so people would say, well, yeah, loads of cash. Of course he did, but we can all point to examples of footballers who have loads of cash who've not necessarily gone on and been great in business. Gary is somebody who's insatiable in terms of his appetite to do business, but importantly, do the right thing, do business in the right way. Again, if I go back to my obsession with radical educational changes, UA in 92, which is the university he set up 5 or 6 years ago now, just gives people a more flexible way of learning and doing degrees, which I think is great. It's his way of putting something back into society. He's politically interested and attuned to what's going on. Like me, Labour, but not to the point where he won't criticise them when they're wrong. But his work rate is just phenomenal. Never known anybody to work as hard.
Is that
as
the
Gary
athlete
Neville.
kind of mentality?
I don't know where to. I mean, I still think he's been cloned, but he is just phenomenal in terms of his work rate. But a really, really nice guy. And you go into the places where he has, ownership of, from hospitality venues through to his construction sites, through to the people who work on the production of his podcast, through to the university. They love him. He's a really, really nice guy. And it'd be very easy for Gary Neville, given the profile, given his cash, given the success he's had, to be arrogant or standoffish or forget his roots. He's still a lad from Bury. It's just that he's got a few bob in the bank. So I really, really admire Gary Neville for all of those reasons. The other one would be a woman called Victoria Brown, who's my wife. Okay, see what I said earlier about luck? God knows how I pulled that one off, Andrew. She is a really, really smart entrepreneur. She owns her own HR consultancy business, has spun that into a tech business and then spun that into health and safety business, and will definitely be the person in our family who sells the business and enables us to buy that much needed yacht. It's not going to be me. So I admire, and I think I don't want to sound patronising when I say this, and I'm always careful when I talk about female and male entrepreneurs and the different challenges, because we all have different challenges to face. But I do think there is something about a female in business who's also a really good mum, hands-on mum, and is able to juggle and balance all of those things in ways that fellas just, and this is wrong, but fellas don't have to. Don't get me wrong, she makes sure I do as fair a share as she would see as necessary. But I do think women have that more maternal approach to life that means she'd feel more guilty missing a kid's play than I would. And yet she still manages to spin all those plates and run a successful business. So I admire her. And of the people that I've sort of not met but read about, and, you know, books to potentially steer people towards, I'm trying to think of the guy's name, but it was the founder of Nike.
Okay.
And there's a book called Shoe Dog. And in terms of just resilience, grit, determination of eventually getting to where he wanted to go, that's a great book to read. As I say, I can't remember the guy's name, but Shoe Dog is the book, and it's the story of how Nike was founded. So I'll give those three as sort of the people that in business I admire. But there's loads of them out there, you know, business leaders who nobody listening to this podcast will have heard of. But no, they just won't have heard of people because, you know, it's people like Simon Kroll at Kroll Quillette, who raises literally thousands of pounds every year through charity by doing mad things. He doesn't have to do that.
Yeah.
You know, he's got a very comfortable lifestyle. He's got a successful business. It's people like Natalie Billings-Reeves, who does the Animates business project, but then puts so much back into schools, into communities. And, you know, those people are not household names, but I admire them because you see on a day-to-day basis the difference they make.
Do you see, I mean, in the role you're in, and kind of particularly talking about your wife as an entrepreneur, do you see a change in people as they age? Is, you know, are the qualities of leadership, entrepreneurship in your 20s different from your 30s, from your 40s, your 50s? Do you think? Do people go on a journey?
I think what I've seen change with Vic, because obviously that's the closest relationship I've got with somebody in business, is she's a much better manager now. I think she used to get over emotional about a business and decision making, and I think that was a combination of being a woman and also being inexperienced. So she's a bit laid back, a bit more chilled now. And I think that the other thing that people tend to do as they get a little bit older is they will take a bit of a punt. They'll take a risk. So if I'd have said to her, invest £50,000 in setting up a spin-off health and safety business 10 years ago, she'd have looked at me as though I had two heads. Whereas now she's got the confidence, I think, to do that. So I think it's just experience, confidence. I think you start to believe a bit more in the product that you've got. So that's what you see. People become a bit more reflective, I think.
In downtown, you do have a kind of high number of female business owners, entrepreneurs as well. Is that been something you think people have been attracted to from the culture of downtown? You know, it's not all kind of white and male and stale as a crowd. How's that?
We've never deliberately set out to do that. I just hope that we've created an environment where female business leaders feel valued and comfortable. And it's great of you to say that and to observe that, because we feel that. But, you know, we're still challenged with the female business community in terms of getting speakers, for example. The number of times that we have panels and people say to me, why didn't you have a woman? And honestly, Andrew, if I told them the number of women I speak to, say, come and speak on a panel, come and tell us about your business, come and tell us about your success, and they go, don't want to do that. Don't want to do that. And these are brilliant, brilliant female business leaders. But unlike lots of fellas, myself included, who love talking about themselves, women just don't. So I think that's something that we need to address, and we need to work on that as much as anyone else. But in terms of just making sure that that environment is comfortable, I don't know how that's come about, but it's great that it has.
It definitely has from my observations of your crowd. You've kind of touched on it already, but your reading list then for any budding entrepreneurs or business people, anything on your summer reading list, and the books you'd recommend.
Don't do the political stuff. Actually,
I've seen your bookshelf at your office.
I have to read some of that stuff just from a job. There was a good book. I can't think of the title, but Rory Stewart's book.
Something at the edge, wasn't it?
Yeah. On the Edge.
On the Edge.
So Rory Stewart's
Politics
book,
on the Edge.
Politics on the Edge. And the reason why, even if you're not interested in politics, it's a great book in terms of some of his personal challenges, the resilience that he's shown in his life, because he's been in the forces as well. Rory, and he's been a volunteer working internationally. But the great thing about that book is it basically demonstrates a lot of what I've been saying today in terms of the way the political system is broken. So if you're going to read any political book, I'd say read that. In terms of business books, there's a book by a guy called Seth Godin called Purple Cow, which is the best book I've ever read in terms of marketing your business. So if you're a startup, or even if you're a business that's looking for a bit of a reset in terms of your image, getting people to know about your product, Purple Cow is a brilliant book. The one I've mentioned, Shoe Dog, also The Ride of a Lifetime is a great book. Bob Iger. So that's Disney. Brilliant, brilliant book. That comes to mind. I'm trying to think another book I've read that was, I'm trying to think the title and the author. Both really good. Anyway, those good starting points. I think I'll leave it at that, because what I would say to people is that, and this is for personal taste, I suppose, I love reading books of people's stories and journeys, which both Live
you
at
learn
the Right
more
Time
from the journey and the
Shoes
history
Dog
than an instruction manual.
I mean, the Purple Cow is probably the sort of book that I'd have shied away from, but it's so well written. So really, really, it's a good book.
Fantastic. Yeah. So, you've shared with us your journey, which has been fascinating. Downtown today, is it the organisation you envisaged it was? Does it look like the business plan version 1? Is it kind of grown beyond your expectations? What's next for Downtown?
Yeah, it's grown way beyond what I thought it was going to be. So it was going to be a Liverpool network that was trying to make Liverpool City Council perform better, and that was basically working on public affairs with guys in the property sector. So that was the initial sort of mission statement, if I can put it that way. So we evolved, as I say, into a network that was beyond property and took in professional services, creative industries, visitor economy. And then after 2 or 3 years, I was approached by UCLan, funnily enough, to go and do something with entrepreneurs, young business leaders in Lancashire. So we transferred the Downtown brand to Preston initially, seeing how that worked, and that went quite well. So we thought, well, if it can work in Liverpool and Preston, maybe we should go and try and try a different city and see if we can just start to roll the brand out. And I went to see Sir Howard Bernstein, who's sadly passed now, but he was chief executive of Manchester at the time. And I went to see Howard about basically his contact book in Leeds, because I thought Scouser in Manchester, even though Tony Wilson was one of my best mates, not necessarily the ideal blueprint for a successful networking organisation in Manchester. So I went to see Howard and said, who do you know in Leeds? Because we're thinking of setting Downtown up over there. And he said, why are you going to Leeds? I said, well, Manchester, you had at the time Angie Robinson, who's Liam Robinson's mum. She was chief executive of the chamber, very successful chamber. You had a very, very good Institute of Directors that was run by a woman called Laura Wolfe, and you had something called Pro Manchester, which was really active. He said, yeah, but there's nothing like downtown in business. He'd been to a couple of our events in Liverpool and noticed quite a fresh audience. He said, every one of these events I go to, I'm talking to the same people. He said, I want you to come in and disrupt things a little bit. Now, that was and he basically said to me, I'll do your launch event and I'll get you your first sponsors. so you get that sort of offer from somebody like Howard Bernstein. You're absolutely taking it. That's how we ended up in Manchester. Let me just take you back to 2003. That was about 2009, I think. Maybe 2008, 2009. When we set up in Liverpool, the leadership of the council were phoning people who were subscribing to Downtown Liverpool saying, it's really not a good idea for you to do that.
Wow.
They tried to kill us then. The reason I know this is the chairman of the Chamber of Commerce at the time was a guy called David Wade Smith, who was obviously party to these conversations, because the Chamber of Commerce, not David, but a lot of the board, were nervous as hell to us coming into their space as they saw it in Liverpool. And they tried to kill us then. It obviously didn't work. And if you know anything about Scousers, if you tell them to not do something, then they're more likely to do it. So I think we probably got a boost in membership at the time. However, I think in a nutshell, that tale tells you of why the cities have gone in the direction that they've gone. So Liverpool, okay, we've improved somewhat since those doldrum days of the 60s, 70s and 80s, but we're still way behind where Manchester is. And I think that's because Manchester, if they spot something that they think can help support and build their economic growth, they just welcome you in to support you. Whereas Liverpool look at something, and if they can't quite get you, or they think, oh, you might say something that we don't quite agree with, or you might disagree with, you might push back against it, they try and kill you dead. Manchester have got that confidence to say, yeah, you're going to say things that we don't agree with, but you know what? We're confident enough to handle that, and we know you'll bring business people to us who we can't reach at the moment, so come on in. And that's all about leadership, isn't it?
Yeah. Where does that? Because it's not a Scouse trait, risk aversion. I mean, you've just said, you tell a Scouse to do something, probably, or not to do something, probably going to do it. That risk aversion to me isn't part of our culture. So how do we always get afraid of doing something different or taking a risk?
Do you know, I don't know where it's come from, but I do think that Liverpool is more left than Manchester. And possibly
left is disrupt. Left, conservative. Right is conservative. Left is.
It's also mistrust of business, then, I think. And in fact, is it left?
I mean, conservative is conserve the status quo, isn't it?
Let's go into your space, ERDF funding, right? Which you and I think have got a similar view of in terms of its impact on business support and business growth. So when I was leader of the Regional Assembly, I went and negotiated Liverpool's second tranche of Objective 1 money. And for those who don't know the technicalities around it, it's just a big sum of money. Most places in England got Objective 2, including Manchester. And I think what that European cash did, Andrew, was create a whole myriad of public sector-led agencies. Some of the characters and personalities still around today because they've just reinvented themselves with different pots of funding. And I think potentially what that did to our city and to Merseyside, as it was known back then, is it allowed the public sector to be dominant and to lead on everything. Because if you wanted any cash, you needed to get the agreement of the public sector.
Why
And that's
did
not
that
just
money
politicians.
not get passed down? Why did it get held? Because it was meant to go to grassroots. So why did it get held at public or pseudo-public institution
I think
level?
the public sector just like building empires.
Right.
And I do think that in Liverpool, even today, I'm not suggesting that this is the case with Liam and Steve, but certainly some of the people below them think that unless it's public sector led, it shouldn't be happening. And I'm not going to go into details of some of the things that we're involved in at the moment, where I could probably spell that example out far more clearly.
Is that a guardian? Is it a stewardship thing? Does that come from a place of stewardship?
I don't know. Is it paternal?
Kind of paternal. Yeah.
I don't know. But the difference, the stark difference between Liverpool and Manchester is about leadership, and it's about confidence, and it's about trusting your stakeholders and your partners. I wouldn't even say, go back to the 80s when Liverpool would say it had like the most left wing of councils. So go back to your point, it's radical, it's disruptive and so on. I was in community development then. Community groups hated that Labour council. Hated Militant. Because Militant and Labour wanted to control everything. Co-ops had a massive bust up with that Labour council. The black community had a massive bust up with that Labour council. And it was because, in their eyes, and I think they were right, they wanted to control everything. And I'm not suggesting that it's as bad now, but I still think there's a hangover from whether it be Objective One, whether it be a paternalistic culture, whether it be that because Liverpool went through 3 decades of decline, the public sector felt the need to intervene, even Michael Heseltine's public sector, whether that is still something that they feel the need to impose. But it doesn't help the city in terms of its growth moving forward. You've got to trust your private sector partners. You've got to trust your community partners to get on and do things.
Looking at your looking at your kind of background or the people you engage with, on the political front, are the young people coming up, are they not more on the left institutionalised the problem to all the grand challenges, climate change, everything else? It's political power, it's not free enterprise. Is that a worry that we should be having, is that young people are leaning towards institutions in government and leaning towards the state solving their problems rather than free enterprise solving their problems?
I don't think it's a worry, because I think I
They'll
would have
grow
said
out of it.
that when I was young. It's as you get older, you get experience, you start looking at these things differently. And sometimes it is institutions that need to sort these things out. I'm not saying it should be free enterprise and a free-for-all and back to Thatcherism and individualism and there's no such thing as society. What I am saying is there needs to be a balance between a public and private sector that each play their part and their role in moving our economy forward. And I would throw into that mix academic institutions, which again, if we're talking about radical reform, I think
Don't get me started.
Required there, but also the voluntary and third sector, like co-ops, for example. And I think, there's a role for all of these things. There is at times an absolute need for public sector intervention. You won't get me arguing against that. But I think in terms of where young people are quite refreshing in their approach, is that they won't necessarily see it as the old-fashioned party style, let's all get behind Labour, let's all get behind the Tories and it'll be okay. That sort of activism on a day-to-day basis and rolling your sleeves up and getting a campaign started in your own locality to grow trees or to stop people driving diesel cars or anything like that. I'm all in favour of that, because if young people aren't going to do that, then who is? So I don't think that worries me. I just think that the idealism that those people have at the age of 20, 21, up to maybe 30, if you could bottle some of that and then encourage them to go into mainstream politics and take some of that enthusiasm and some of that urgency and some of that ability to get things done, that doesn't worry me, that excites me. We need to get more of those people.
That's been brilliant. Frank, thank you so much for joining us, for sharing your journey. A lot of leadership lessons in there. And it's been a great talking to you. Thank you.
Well, if you want to know how to be a self-confident, big-headed bastard, this is a much listen.
Cheers, Frank.